You are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. We are here once again. Today, we have another show lined up for y'all today. We're going to talk to a special guest. It's all about storytelling. She's a business coach. She is a speaker. She's a multi-published author and two-time producer of a podcaster and podcast, if I can say it without getting tongue-tied, getting nervous because I'm talking to a really cool person. Her name is Marsha Vanwynsberghe, and she has an awesome website that you can go visit. is marshavanw.com. We're going to learn all about her coaching, but also a little bit later in the show, we'll kind of dive into her podcast that she is all about. First and foremost, welcome to the show, Marsha. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me here today.
I appreciate your time, man. I didn't know I was going to be tripping in the intro, but it's all good. We're going to keep it moving. When you look at the success that you've been able to obtain with your platform, kind of tell the audience a little bit of background of your story and everything that you do.
Absolutely. My story, where I am today is not where I was, which is usually how things go. I was a parent who dealt with teen substance abuse about 12 years ago it started. And during those years, I found myself in a story of shame, judgment, criticism, trying to figure out how to navigate, fix my kids, and then navigate a world that really our story scared the crap out of everyone. And so it was very isolating and very much alone. And during those years, I found I just lost my voice completely because I was afraid to even show up and be seen. And it took a lot of really difficult roads and steps to finally have that turning point that my way was not working. I was not fixing and managing and controlling anyone. I was losing myself in the process. And I didn't want this to be my story anymore. And so during those years, I really dove into a lot of support and mentorship and crisis counselors. And through the process, I started to share my story in very small groups, very safe small groups. And it actually did two things. I was feeling this lightness, almost this letting go of this load. That's the thing. Shame loves secrecy. So the more we don't talk, the more stifling shame is. And the more I found myself starting to share, I was feeling less held back or controlled by shame. But I was also getting feedback from other people and seeing that my story could help somebody else and it could make a difference. That helped me to heal. It gave me more fuel and things just kept growing. And from during those years, it was small stages, small groups to podcasts to writing chapters, really diving into writing my own solo book, and then launching my first podcast, which is now into just under 5 years, Own Your Choices, Own Your Life. And it was really a space. I feel this calling that I want to talk about the difficult things in life that we don't want to talk about. I want to change the meaning that we give to our shame stories because we all have stories, every single one of us. And the parts that we are trying to hide from the world are actually the things that connect us to each other the most. So I really want to dispel a lot of myths about the stories that we're walking through and help people to find their voice and be able to share their story.
You listen to Refocused Radio, talking to our guest, Marsha Vanwynsberghe, and mention your book. People can actually check it out. Is When She Stopped Asking Why, A Mother's Journey Through Teen Substance Abuse and the Loving Path to Finding Her Clarity, Courage, and Purpose. For the audience, kind of dive into that book that you wrote and what was your core mission for it.
I love this question. I had written a couple of different collaborative chapters in 2015, 2016, and then I had the download that I wanted to write my own book. And I felt like the reason I wanted to write it, I felt like I had a lot that I wanted to share, but it was more of the fact that I felt like I could do something good with the story and it could help people who had never walked in my path. because I didn't just want to support parents who were dealing with teen substance abuse. I wanted to be able to support people with, what do you do when your plan does not go according to plan, right? We set this path, this picture for what our life is going to look like, and then it doesn't. And then it's like, what do we do with that? So I remember being so proud and announcing that I was going to write my own solo book, only to have virtually everyone around me say what a horrible idea that was to share a vulnerable story. And I'm so glad that I didn't listen to everyone around me, because that book became the starting point of all the work that I end up getting to do today. But the reason behind it is, like, when she stopped asking why, the why was killing me. And when we're in a really difficult story, asking victim questions like why only keeps us stuck in that. It only keeps us stuck in our stories. And so I learned how to switch from, every time I would ask why, it would be like, no, Marsha, ask what? Like, what can you do? Because what is an action word? And that's how I started to change my story. So I put my head down for a year, really, really isolated myself, worked on this book, got it ready, published it. And it took off in a lot of different ways, more than what I ever even expected. And then I had to really embrace and understand what vulnerability was, and how I had really exposed a lot of myself in this book, to people who read it. And I had to learn how to receive support and receive compliments and feedback. And so it was really a dance of learning those pieces. But going through that process, as difficult as it was definitely one of the best things I've ever done.
And with today's topic, the power of owning your story, why you think, well, speaking for yourself, why you think is at the beginning the most difficult process to own your own story without worrying about the bias of, comparing yourself to this and that? Well, I'm not this person, I'm not that person. Why do you think it's so difficult in the beginning in owning your story?
Okay, this is such a fantastic question. And maybe the way you've asked it, it's brought up something different for me today, which I love, is the fact that we all have, like, at the top of how we see ourselves is our identity. And our identity is, made up of every single thing that we think, what we believe, what our thoughts are. I'm also an NLP trainer, so I understand how our brain works. But this identity piece and our stories is really part of our identity, what we've walked through, how we see ourselves. And so, yes, most of the time people say, I'm afraid of what others are going to think or say. At the end of the day, we are by far our own biggest critic. We are so much harder on ourselves than what most people are. So is it really what someone else is going to think or say? Is it really, or is it come down to how will we look and what will what will that exude? So I think the biggest thing that happens is that we have this identity of this story is our identity. And it's not our identity. It's an experience that we have walked through. So that's, I think, one of the first things is changing and reframing that story and allowing it to have a different meaning. Because my meaning of my story for years was that I had failed as a mother. That was my meaning, is that I had failed as a mother. I had failed as a person. This was my job and I didn't do it. And when I started to give it a different meaning, I could start to see the story differently. So I think that's one of the biggest things that hold people back. And I think that we get so caught in the weeds of our story that it becomes our identity. And we don't know how to separate ourselves from that and look at it as an experience that we've walked through.
I like the visual of getting the weeds, because I think that's human nature. It's kind of easy for us to find ourselves in the weeds, even when we don't want to. And with your experience, you are also a personal trainer. When it comes to athletics and sports, we all know how teams can fail. Well, we all personally can do that in our own life. When it comes to experiencing failure, how you define that and how is it important to overcome those failures?
Yes, I had 28 years as a kinesiologist. So I've spent a big chunk of my life in health, fitness, And my favorite movies are sports movies and overcoming, and those are absolute favorite. I think that when it comes to this piece of failure and overcoming failure, I don't even like to use the word failure. For me, it's an opportunity for feedback. That's how I frame it in my own head is that I don't even have an opportunity to fall down or fail or have feedback if I don't make an action step. So many of us are afraid of making those mistakes, of falling, of not having it work out, that we don't even get into action. And what if it could actually turn out better than what we could ever imagine? We have played out the worst case scenarios for every single situation long before we've ever even taken a step. So it's we are deciding what the outcome is going to be. We have no way of knowing what that is. We have no way of predicting that. And we're setting ourselves up for being in our worst case scenario, back in the same position that we started in. So I think we have to reframe and maybe not give the meaning of failure in that sense, because we won't even have an opportunity to create change if we don't move. So there is no failure or winning if we don't start taking action steps. And some of my biggest mistakes that I've made in my life have been some of my biggest teachers. And the way I look at it is that whatever lens I apply to that lesson is the meaning that I give it. And one of the things I always say is the story only ever has the meaning that I give it. So if I apply the lens that I look at the situation and say that me going through this experience with our kids meant that I failed as a parent, that's the meaning that I give it. Or if I change the lens and I look at it and say, as difficult as those years were, I had to walk through them to become the person that I am today, which is a very different person. And I'm grateful for those changes, which has allowed me to build a better relationship with my kids, which also allows me to do the work that I get to do today. None of that would have been possible without walking through those stories. So I think we have to be very careful of the meaning that we give failure, and also knowing it can be feedback. And the other piece of it is stopping ourselves from starting for fear of failure when we're already living in our worst case scenario of not going anywhere anyways.
Once again, talking to our guest today, Marsha Vanwynsberghe. You can go to her website, marshavanw.com. And for our listeners, when we are exploring the idea of the power of owning our story, do you believe that when people find their voice, that it enables them to help others find theirs?
10,000%. I think that's the only way. I actually think by allowing ourselves to show up and show the most relatable parts of ourselves, that is the only way that we can step into using the gifts that we have. And that's what allows us to help others. People will say to me all the time, what should I start my business on? I'm like, well, what did you walk through? What experience do you have? And they will say, well, I don't want to talk about those things. I'm like, but that's what you have experience in. That's what you can make a biggest difference with. So yes, I completely agree.
And when a person discovers their voice, all of a sudden they start having a platform. They start to gain influence. And when they start to have that type of responsibility with a platform, how do they attend to that so that way they don't lose their way?
That's a great question. I think it's very easy to lose your way. I think you have to keep coming back to your why and what you're doing and focusing on that. When you start sharing your story and you start to get different exposure, we all know, with social media, and podcasting, a story and a message can go out there and it can go places. I had a conversation 2 weeks ago with a dad who's building a podcast out in Israel, because he came across my information. So we can literally go all over the place, which is amazing. And that's not the whole why. We have to keep coming back to why we're doing what we're doing, and trusting and knowing that our message will go and land where it is meant to go, but staying true to who we are and recognizing that we can make something good happen out of this difficult situation that we've walked through.
And with your website, when people go to marshavanw.com, you also, when you provide coaching, what's some of the things that you put in place that is different from others?
Thank you for that question. Yes, everything is on my website. And what I've done differently is like I've helped a lot of different people learn how to write their book, speak on stage, start their podcast, start their coaching business, all by learning to see their story differently and recognize what their gifts and strengths are. And I think what makes me different is that I've spent the last couple of years finishing my NLP, my neuro-linguistic programming practitioner, masters, and trainers, which means that I really have a better understanding of how our mindset works, how powerful our thoughts are, how to actually change the limiting belief roots and stories that we have all held on to, and how they're dictating what we do and don't do in our lives. And I'm able to add those frameworks to it. And so that means that we don't just rewrite a new story. We actually learn how to change it right at the root and heal through that process, because we don't just get to consciously rewrite the story. Well, we can, but for long-lasting results, it really is embracing and understanding how powerful our subconscious mind is so that we can completely change that story at the core.
When the individual learns how to own their story, things begin to shift in their lives. So what are some key core ingredients that a person can carry with them as they are using this story to share with the masses?
Some key core things that they can carry with them as they continue to share their story with the masses.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I think that some of the key things that can come with them is and I'm going to speak from my own personal experience, is that you learn how to apply more self-compassion, more grace with yourself. You become less reactive to life, to other people's reactions to some of the things that they might be saying. You will change as a person because you do respond differently. The same triggers won't have the same charge on you. And all of a sudden you start to respond and show up differently. And when you show up differently and respond to life differently, different opportunities open up. And so it's a beautiful space to be in, and recognizing that you can make a really big difference with your story out in the world and just live a life of purpose. And I'm going to even say peace, like purpose, peace, mission, and going back to finding more joy and more gratitude in the present moment. That's been huge for me.
I'm glad you said that, because what's interesting is I think sometimes, I can speak for everybody, but I put my own self out there. I think sometimes we can think of peace in a certain way that I can only have it if I can live my life like so-and-so. So you just fill in the blank, this celebrity, this influencer or whatever. And sometimes we try to say, I can only have my peace if I can do this on that level, versus just staying to your story, because if you stay to your story, one day someone's probably going to compare you to that influencer.
Yes. And comparison is literally it is a very sneaky devil. I call it a devil, because it will take you right off of your game. Two things happen. Well, more than two, but it will take you off of your game because you will stop and compare yourself to someone else, which means you're not going to be using your gifts. You are not stepping into your true, authentic nature, your voice, everything that you're here to do. And it's like you're now on the wrong track. You're on the wrong track, and you're comparing yourself to a person who you're looking at one snapshot of their life, like one little blip of their life in a day. You don't know their story. I always say, you think you know someone's story, you don't know their story. There's a backstory. There's 20, 30, 40 chapters before you even started reading the book. So the second you fall into that comparison, you take yourself off of your own path where your strengths are. And we don't need to be in comparison with each other, because there's enough for everyone. There is no lack. I believe that we can all rise. I really do. And so comparison is a very sneaky devil. And I've caught it many times in my life, especially when I was in my lowest points, because I figured I must be walking through this because I'm being punished for something I did, or I'm not doing things as good as they did it. And so when I catch comparison dropping in, I have to pull back, and it's like, nope, it's time to put real boundaries, parameters in social media, be super intentional about what I'm looking at, and practice being able to see that there's something available for all of us.
Once again, talking to our guest, Marsha Vanwynsberghe, and you go visit her awesome website. It's real easy. It's marshavanw.com. And I share this every now and then. Is two things real quick. There's a favorite quote I had since sophomore year in high school, and I carried it in my wallet all the way through college. And it was by Blaise Pascal. And he said, and he wasn't even like a religious person, but he said something pretty profound. He said, in faith, there's enough light for those who want to believe, but also enough shadows to blind those who don't.
Oh.
And when I first read that, immediately that made me decide what I was going to do in college. So I studied philosophy, read Socrates, all because of this quote by Blaise Pascal. And I think it's true. You have enough light to see, or you have enough shadows to blind. And there's another thing that I used to say when I first started this podcast, and it goes with this whole topic. So I'm not going to get carried away, but it goes with the topic of power owning your story. And that is, life is a blank canvas, and our action is our paint. But what we do with that action is our mark on history. And to your point, however we are deciding to do during the dash is all people will see. They can't see what you did not do. They can only see what you did.
That is both those, like, so powerful what you just said. Absolutely love it. Thank you for sharing that with me. And not nearly as a profound quote. I have a lot of them, but the one that it was Stephen Covey that shifted me probably like 8-9 years ago, when I read saying, like, you are not a product of your circumstances, you're a product of your decisions. That became a moment, right? That became a moment where I went, okay, wait. So, because in our story, our kids were minors. So we were living in it. Like, it's not like it was my husband, I could have him leave. It was, I had to find a way to manage it. And so in those times, it was like, okay, I'm not a product of my circumstances. This is my circumstances, but I'm not a product of it. I'm a product of what my decisions are. What do I choose to do next? How do I choose to respond? And that's where, for me, owning my choices became one of the mantras that I would check in with, like, multiple times an hour. If something was going wrong, I would stop and say, is that my choice? Nope, that one's not my choice. That one's not my choice. That means that if you're in that situation, I'm not turning around and blaming my kids for the choices that they're making. I decided to stand in a space of ownership and say, but what is my choice? Like, what am I going to do next? And how do I take responsibility for myself? And ironically, that's exactly what my kids had to do, right? They had to make those decisions themselves. They had to decide that. It wasn't anything I was doing or not doing. They had to make the decision for themselves, which they did. And so much, we spend so much time and energy trying to fix, manage, control, micromanage other people, when if we could just practice getting into a space of leading ourselves first, that it would, like, that's where change starts from.
And you have different tools for our audience to tap into. One of them is Outspoken NLP certification. Can you explain what is Outspoken NLP?
Yes, absolutely. So I actually finished my NLP trainers last year. What that means is I can teach people the tools of neurolinguistic programming, understanding how their brain works, the thoughts, and how to work through the steps of healing and supporting ourselves and our clients. And so I decided to create a coaching certification, which somebody can walk away with the NLP tools and be able to use them for themselves or their clients. But what everybody was coming to me for was asking about how can I learn how to use my voice more? I want to be able to share a story and use my voice. And the word outspoken landed for me because that's literally what I was told as a kid, was constantly outspoken, too much, all those things. And so NLP has helped me to learn how to heal some of those old stories, stand in a space of using my voice and knowing that it's meant for more and can help others. And in this process, we do a 6-month program where people are able to come in, learn the NLP tools, but also use their voice with confidence so that they can share their story, their gifts with others and step into the roles that they're meant to. They're meant for it. They're built for it.
Another thing I tell people sometimes is when we survive pain, it becomes someone else's medicine.
Yeah.
For you personally, how has your pain and your life experience helped you to create a culture that inspires your community?
I love this question. I love it. I feel like I have really been able to hold space for others without taking it on, right? I have really good boundaries, good energetic boundaries, those pieces. But I feel like by sharing my story, I've given others permission to do the same and to learn how to turn a very difficult experience into something good. And so whether it is my community that they are direct clients or people that I know, I have seen people be able to step into a space of sharing who they are authentically. And it lights me up, from stories all across the board with addiction, with overcoming abuse, so many things that they're freeing themselves of being tapped into that identity of the story, and they're seeing a bigger picture. Outside of that, even into my podcast community and people that I don't know directly, I get messages from people who are starting to share stories of, without coming across as a victim, being able to share it for a purpose of assault and abuse. And they are feeling, and I can see it, and I can see it in them, and I can hear it. They are feeling this letting go of, now the story doesn't have as much hold on me. And I don't know exactly what's going to happen yet. And that's the thing. I like to say, you don't have to be on a podcast, write a book. You don't have to take a story to that level that I did, but that was a purpose that was calling me. But what I can say is that if you don't own your story, it owns you. And if it owns you, it controls you. And when it controls you, it stops you from saying yes or no to different opportunities that are available in your life. So learning how to release the vice grip hold of those stories, it'll change your life.
Once again, talking to our guest, Marsha Vanwynsberghe. You can go to her website, marshavanw.com. Man, time went by like a vapor. So what's the best way people can stay in touch with you and call to action?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Honestly, I absolutely love this conversation. The nice thing is I do have a long last name. So anywhere on social media or Google, if you start typing Marsha Van W, it will come up. You can connect with me on any social media platform. And my podcast is called Own Your Choices, Own Your Life. And we are into episode 550 right now. Not as many as you have, which I love seeing this from podcasters, but that you can connect with me through that show as well.
Been listening to Refocus Radio, talking to our guest, Marsha Vanwynsberghe, and you can go visit her website, again, marshavanw.com. I want to say thank you again, taking time talking to us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Honestly, I'm so grateful for this conversation.